Hey there, I hope you're doing well today, and thank you for spending a few moments of your day with me. Earlier in the week, I started a new devotional series that I'm calling In the Arena, Fighting Against Temptation. The premise is pretty simple, that as you and I, as followers of Christ, are experiencing temptation, hopefully we want to experience it with victory and success. And that is made all the more likely when we understand exactly how it works. In the first installment, we looked at this principle that God has shared with us about temptation, which I believe is this, that you and I are most vulnerable to temptation when we are in isolation. I want to add to that thought today and frame it up initially with this idea. There's some things I know to be true about myself, one of which is that my mind is a crazy place. And those of you who are watching this that know me and know me well may say, that's an understatement. You're stark raving mad. I get it. I think all kinds of crazy things. I understand that. Among the things that I think about are some trivial details, observations in life that other people may not necessarily have noticed. Let me give you an example. In cities all across the country, small and great, you may find a strip mall that has a whole number of different little storefronts in it. There may be a Papa John's and a Chinese takeout. There may be a nail salon and a Great Clips. And in all of those stores, there may be a little small storefront that has a church in it. It's not unusual to see that. What is interesting to me and what regularly catches my attention is what the names are of some of these little churches. They may be New Life World Outreach Center. And every time I see that, it causes me to pause. I'm like, really? World Outreach? It seems like maybe Street Outreach might be a better name. World Outreach feels so overstated. I want you to think about an aspect of temptation involving overstatement that is very, very dangerous for us. And the principle is this, that regularly what occurs in temptation is this, that God's boundaries are overstated. God's boundaries are overstated. We see that again in Genesis chapter 3. Hopefully you remember what's going on, that you have Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Eve apparently is by herself when Satan comes along and he poses a question that starts in verse 1. He says to her, did God really say, did God really say it, that you can't eat from any tree in the garden? So that's the question. Her response starts in verse 2. She says, we may eat the fruit from the trees in the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said you must not eat it or touch it or you will die. All right, so let's look first at the question, because I believe what you see in this are two instances, one from Satan and then one from Eve, where God's boundaries are overstated. And that's important. His question to Eve is, did God say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden? So all these trees, did God say you can't eat from any of them? Is that what God really said? Well, no. You see it back in verse 16 of chapter 2, what God said. The Lord told them, you are free to eat from any tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So everything is in bounds for you except this one tree. It's a green light for every tree except that one. You stay away from that one. You don't eat from the fruit of that tree. But notice his question to Eve, did God really say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden? What's he doing? He's not repeating the boundary, he's overstating the boundary. Why in the world do you think Satan would have done that? Why would he use overstating God's boundaries in temptation? I think it's pretty logical that if Eve could get to the point where she's like, well, maybe God said you can't eat from any tree, that would seem to be unreasonable. I mean, we can't eat from any tree? That's just kind of crazy. That's unreasonable. And if God's standards can begin to be thought of as unreasonable, as egregious, just beyond the pale, then the thought is, what our response may be then is that we'll just ignore them. Satan overstated God's boundaries, but he was not the only one who did that there in the garden. You see what Eve did in her response. And out of the gate, you just want to praise her. Man, she's doing a really good job saying, no, that's not what God said, but pay attention to what she does. At the end of verse 3, she says that God said, you must not eat it or touch it or you will die. So did God say you can't even touch the tree? No, that's not what God said. God said you must not eat from the tree. Well, why is it dangerous for her to overstate this? Well, I think it is that if Eve starts thinking, well, God said I can't even touch it, again, it makes his boundaries, when they're overstated, seem unreasonable. Well, what happens if I just bump up against it? Maybe if in the process of trying to pick an apple, I just accidentally bump into some of the fruit from that. Does that mean that it's curtains for me? I mean, it's the end because I can't even touch it. I mean, that just seems so unreasonable. I mean, there's no way I can possibly do that. So if God's standards can be thought of as to be unreasonable, then they almost become absurd. They become ridiculous. And when they get to that point, we think, well, there's just no use. I'm not going to pay any attention to them. Well, let's take it from the Garden of Eden to 2020. Well, what's going on today? Did God say that we cannot talk as people to others? No, God didn't say that. But God did say when we're talking to people that we shouldn't lie to them, that we shouldn't gossip. God said that we shouldn't use foul language. So if you want to overstate what God has said, you would say, well, God said don't talk to anybody. Well, He didn't say that. He said don't lie, don't gossip, don't use foul language. As it relates to sexual activity, did God say absolutely no sexual activity? I've made you capable of it, but it's completely out of bounds. No, that's not what God has said. He said, you can experience this, but only within the confines and exclusively within the confines of marriage. It's complete green light in marriage, but outside, it's out of bounds. When God puts up boundaries for us, I want you to remember this, that He does them for our good. He's not trying to keep good things from us. He's trying to keep good things for us. He's trying to keep us out of bad. He's trying to keep us out of that which is harmful. And one of the ways that we can miss out on that and lose in the arena of temptation is when we allow and pay attention to an overstating of God's boundaries. Today, you are going to be experiencing temptation. You probably already have, and as the day stretches on, you're probably going to experience it again. As that happens, understand that one of the things that may be consciously or otherwise going on in your mind is that God's boundaries get overstated. Don't allow yourself to be snookered by that. Pay attention to what God has said, no more, no less, understanding that those boundaries are for your good. And then in the arena of temptation, you'll be able more successfully, more consistently to experience victory. God bless you.